Hey guys, tonight we are drifting back, way back, to a time when the scent of a flower could be a prayer and a waft of incense could pave the way to eternity. Imagine the soft, warm air of ancient Egypt, the sun just beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple over the vast, life-giving Nile. You can almost hear the gentle lapping of water against the reeds and smell the first hints of night-blooming jasmine carried on the evening breeze. This isn't just a history lesson, it's a journey for your senses. A gentle unwinding into a world obsessed with the ephemeral, the aromatic, the divine. And let's be honest, given the sheer effort they put into just smelling nice, you probably wouldn't survive a week trying to keep up with their olfactory standards, especially without modern plumbing. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It truly helps the channel, and lets me know you're out there, hopefully already half asleep. Go ahead and post your location and what time it is where you are. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is drifting off from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing not on solid ground, but on the deck of a small reed skiff. The air is thick, not with humidity as you might expect, but with a complex tapestry of scents. The dominant note is the rich, loamy smell of the black silt, the kemet, the very lifeblood of this land, exposed now as the great river breathes. It's a fertile, earthy perfume, the foundation of everything. As your eyes adjust to the twilight, you see the dark, ribbon-like silhouette of the Nile stretching before you, a god in liquid form, serene yet powerful. The gentle rocking of the skiff is a lullaby in itself. Your gaze drifts to the riverbanks, a riot of deep greens and vibrant bursts of color. Lotus flowers, their petals a delicate pink and ethereal blue, rest upon the water's surface, releasing a clean, almost sweet fragrance that many an Egyptian poet tried, and often hilariously failed, to capture in words. You can imagine them thinking, it's lotusy. Not exactly Keats, but they had a lot on their minds, like crocodiles and the correct way to appease a cat goddess. The papyrus reeds, standing tall and proud like sentinels of the river, rustle in the slight breeze, adding their own subtle green, slightly aquatic scent to the mix. Here and there, acacia trees dot the landscape, their feathery yellow blossoms perfuming the air with a honeyed sweetness that attracts drowsy bees, even as the day ends. This is the raw material, the overture to Egypt's grand symphony of scents, before the complex unguents, before the meticulously blended temple incenses. There was the natural perfume of the Nile Valley itself. It's a scent that whispered of life, of abundance, of cycles. The ancient Egyptians, you see, were incredibly attuned to their environment. They didn't just live in Egypt, they lived with Egypt. And the river was their constant companion, their provider, their god Hapi in flowing form. This annual gift of the river, the great inundation known as Akhet, was a central fact of Egyptian existence. For months, the waters would rise, depositing that life-giving black silt across the floodplains. This wasn't just agricultural renewal, it was a potent symbol of rebirth, mirroring their deepest beliefs about life, death, and the journey into the afterlife. And scent, you'll come to understand, was intrinsically woven into these concepts. A pleasant smell wasn't just nice. It was a manifestation of purity, of vitality, of divine presence. To be fragrant was to be alive, to be blessed. Conversely, a foul odor signified decay, danger, and the absence of the divine. It's no wonder, then, that they put so much effort into ensuring not only their living spaces, but also their own bodies, and, crucially, the bodies of their dead were surrounded by pleasing aromas. Historians still argue whether the pervasive scent of the lotus was considered the primary aroma of life, or if other blooms held similar sway in different nomes or periods. It's one of those lovely, unanswerable details that keeps dusty academics in business. It's quite something to think that while you might reach for a can of air freshener that vaguely smells of ocean breeze, which, let's face it, often smells more like a confused chemist, an ancient Egyptian might have simply gathered a handful of blue lotus petals or perhaps burned some readily available aromatic wood to achieve a similar, if more natural effect. One rather charming, though perhaps less documented. Practice was the creation of simple floral collars or wide necklaces made from fresh blooms and fragrant leaves. Imagine someone weaving these vibrant, scented garlands, a temporary burst of perfume worn close to the skin, releasing its gentle fragrance with every movement. This wasn't high perfumery, not the stuff of Pharaoh's tombs yet, but it was an intimate, everyday connection to the scented world around them. A personal embrace of the Nile's fragrant gifts. It was a way of carrying a little piece of that sacred, life-giving aroma with you. The effort involved in just existing in ancient Egypt was considerable, let alone maintaining a divinely acceptable level of personal fragrance. Think about it, no running water on tap, no quick showers, and the sun beating down relentlessly. Yet, the desire for pleasant scents was paramount. This wasn't mere vanity. It was a deep-seated cultural and spiritual imperative. The air itself was a conduit, carrying prayers to the gods, and they hoped, carrying the essence of the deceased safely into the duat, the complex, sometimes perilous, Egyptian underworld. The journey through the duat was fraught with trials and tests, and arriving pleasantly scented was like showing up to a very important, very mystical job interview with your celestial resume, perfectly perfumed. You wanted to make a good first and eternal impression on Osiris. So, as you drift along this imaginary Nile, feel the cool evening air begin to settle. Carrying those first foundational scents, these are the smells that would later be captured, concentrated, and combined in a quest for immortality, for divine connection, and for ensuring that one's Ka, the life force, and Ba, the soul, had a fragrant welcome in the field of reeds. This initial immersion, this bath of natural aromas, is just the beginning of our olfactory exploration. The real artistry, the secret recipes, the divine chemistry. That's all yet to unfold. That gentle lapping of the Nile against your reed skiff, the distant scent of lotus you were just imagining. It wasn't merely a pleasant backdrop to daily life for the ancient Egyptians. Oh no, it was far more profound. Those natural fragrances, the ones we just explored, were seen as whispers from the gods themselves, hints of a divine perfume that permeated the very fabric of their world. You see, in their understanding, everything good, everything pure, everything powerful, had a delightful aroma. The gods, naturally, were at the very pinnacle of this fragrant hierarchy. They didn't just like nice smells, they were nice smells. Their presence was often heralded by an inexplicable and beautiful scent, a sort of divine calling card. So, if you wanted to get on their good side, and you definitely wanted to be on the good side of beings who could control the harvest, the river, or whether you stubbed your toe particularly painfully that morning, you offered them what they appreciated most: more lovely smells. It was like inviting a celebrity chef over and making sure your kitchen smelled like their favorite Michelin-starred restaurant. Times 1,000. No pressure. Imagine yourself now, stepping away from the riverbank, moving towards the towering stone pylons of a temple complex. Perhaps Karnak or Luxor, as the sun begins its ascent. The air here changes. It's still warm, still carries the faintest hint of the river's damp earthiness. But now it's overlaid with something richer, something deliberately crafted. This is the domain of the gods, and their divine noses were considered extraordinarily discerning. You couldn't just waft any old weed in their direction and hope for the best. This required serious olfactory effort. The priests, those ancient masters of ceremony and, as it turns out, aroma, conducted daily rituals at dawn, noon, and dusk. The temple would be filled with the rising smoke of incense and the subtle perfume of freshly applied unguents. Cult statues, believed to be actual homes for the god's spirits on earth, weren't just dusted, they were anointed, perfumed, and censed with meticulous care. This wasn't just housekeeping, it was an act of awakening, of pleasing, of sustaining the divine. The mainstream understanding is that offering incense was a fundamental part of these daily temple rites, a way to nourish the gods, much like food offerings, but on a more ethereal, spiritual plane. The gods, it seems, enjoyed a good sniff as much as a good snack. Think of the god Ra, the mighty sun god. His fragrance was often associated with frankincense, pure, bright, resinous, its smoke ascending like the sun's rays, carrying prayers and praises upwards. Or Hathor, goddess of love, beauty, and music. She might be offered myrrh, with its warm, slightly spicy, and deeply feminine aroma, or garlands of the most fragrant flowers like the blue lotus we encountered on the Nile, its scent synonymous with creation and rebirth. And then there was Nefertum, an actual god of perfume. He was often depicted as a beautiful young man with a lotus flower on his head, sometimes emerging from it. He was the divine scent, the ultimate personification of the beautiful aroma that signaled the presence of the holy. If Nefertum was around, you knew things smelled amazing. Having a dedicated god of perfume really tells you something about how seriously they took this whole business. It's like us having a god of Wi-Fi. You know it's essential to modern happiness. You are now a junior priest, perhaps tasked with preparing the morning incense. The air in the temple's inner sanctum is cool, a stark contrast to the burgeoning heat outside. Sunlight, carefully channeled through small openings high in the massive stone walls, illuminates swirling motes of ancient dust and, soon, fragrant smoke. Your hands work rhythmically, grinding resins like frankincense and myrrh on a stone palette, mixing them with dried flowers, herbs, and perhaps a little honey or wine to bind them. Following ancient, sacred recipes, the scent molecules begin to release, a complex bouquet that is both grounding and uplifting. Historians still argue whether the primary purpose of temple incense was to please the gods directly with its aroma, or if its role was more to purify the sacred space, the priests, and the offerings, thereby making the entire environment acceptable and sanctified for the divine presence to manifest. Perhaps it was both, a celestial air freshener and a spiritual filter, all in one. The head priest, a stern but ultimately fair man who probably hasn't smiled since the Second Dynasty, inspects your work with a critical sniff, a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Success! You haven't accidentally summoned a minor demon of bad smells. This daily offering was critical. It was believed that the gods partook of the essence of the offerings, the aroma of the incense, the spiritual quality of the food. The smoke was a visual representation of prayers ascending, of the intangible becoming a vehicle for communication with the divine. One rather intriguing tidbit is the practice of perfuming the way for sacred barks. When the statue of a god was to be moved, perhaps for a festival procession, priests would walk before it, wafting incense, literally laying down a carpet of beautiful smells for the deity to travel upon. It's the ancient Egyptian equivalent of rolling out the red carpet, only much more fragrant and with significantly higher spiritual stakes. Get the scent wrong, and maybe Amun-Ra decides to take an unscheduled detour, leading to all sorts of cosmic paperwork. This deep connection between scent and divinity naturally extended to human aspirations for the afterlife. If the gods loved good smells, and if you wanted to join their ranks or at least comfortably navigate their realm after death, smelling good yourself was a very sensible strategy. It was like having the right password to get into the celestial VIP lounge. A life lived in a pleasingly fragrant manner, making regular offerings, and ensuring your own body was respectfully scented, was thought to curry favor with the deities who would judge your soul. The scent of your deeds, so to speak, was as important as the deeds themselves. So, as the incense smoke curls upwards in the temple, carrying with it the hopes and prayers of a nation, it also carries the individual's hope for a fragrant welcome in the duat. The gods, after all, had a universe to run. They probably didn't have time for lengthy interviews with every single soul. A pleasant, familiar aroma. Ah, yes, this one clearly knew the protocols. Send them through to the field of reeds. It's a delightfully simplistic way to view divine justice, but it highlights the profound importance of these divine aromas. The quest for these scents, for the perfect ingredients to please these discerning celestial beings, would lead Egyptian perfumers to explore their own land and eventually lands far beyond. So, you've successfully appeased the divine nostrils with perfectly ground incense, and Amun-Ra has decided to let the sun rise again. Good job, junior priest. But have you ever paused, amidst the swirling sacred smoke, to wonder where all those fragrant bits and pieces actually came from? Those bits of frankincense and myrrh, those dried petals of lotus, the sprigs of mysterious herbs, while some, like the precious resins, undertook epic journeys from faraway lands, a story for later, many of the foundational scents. The daily drivers of the divine perfume cabinet were cultivated much closer to home. In fact, just beyond the towering temple walls, or perhaps nestled within a secluded courtyard, you would find the temple gardens the earthly paradises dedicated to growing the very essence of Egyptian ritual. Imagine stepping out from the cool, shadowy interior of the temple, blinking a little in the bright Egyptian sun. You pass through a smaller, unassuming stone gateway, and suddenly, you're in a different world. This isn't the wild, untamed profusion of the Nile's banks that you experienced earlier. No, this is order, symmetry, intention. Neat. Rectangular plots are laid out with almost geometric precision, intersected by small irrigation channels, gurgling softly as they deliver precious Nile water. Perhaps a central pool, reflecting the clear blue sky, is adorned with blooming water lilies. Yes, our friend the lotus, still making its presence known. The air here is alive with the hum of bees, diligently going about their sacred business of pollination, and the scent is a vibrant tapestry of fresh, green, growing things. It's a much more complex, layered aroma than the incense hall, a living library of fragrances waiting to be harvested. This wasn't your grandma's charmingly chaotic rose garden, unless your grandma happened to be a high priestess with a direct line to Osiris and a serious quota of kaifai to produce. These gardens were the beating heart of the temple's olfactory operations, a dedicated space for cultivating the botanical ingredients essential for the daily rituals, the grand festivals, and, importantly, the perfumed preparations for the afterlife. Many of the larger, wealthier temple complexes, like the famous Karnak, possessed extensive tracts of land, including these specialized gardens, to ensure a steady supply of everything they needed. We know this from temple inscriptions that meticulously list offerings and from the beautiful, detailed scenes of gardens depicted in tomb paintings, which often show workers tending to rows of plants or harvesting flowers. These weren't just for show, they were practical, vital resources. Think of them as the sacred allotment, where every leaf, every petal, every root had a divine purpose. You might see rows of lilies, their trumpet-shaped blooms adding a heady sweetness to the air. Nearby, perhaps irises are being cultivated, not so much for their delicate flower scent in this context, but for their rhizomes, the root-like stems which, when dried and aged, develop a beautiful violet-like aroma and act as a fixative in perfumes, helping other scents last longer. There would be beds of fragrant herbs marjoram, with its warm, slightly spicy scent, mint, cool and refreshing, perhaps chamomile, its apple-like fragrance soothing even before it was brewed or blended. Bunches of these would be gathered, dried in airy sheds, and stored carefully for use in incenses, scented oils, and those intriguing perfume cones we'll get to. The pressure on the temple gardeners must have been immense. Forget a plague of aphids ruining your prize-winning roses. Imagine having to tell the high priest that the sacred blue lotus crop failed just before the Opet festival. Ra might just decide the sun doesn't need to rise quite so punctually tomorrow. The individuals tending these gardens weren't just laborers, they were skilled horticulturists. Often priests themselves or highly trained specialists who understood the sacred nature of their work. They'd know the precise moment to harvest a flower for peak fragrance, the correct way to dry herbs to preserve their aromatic oils, and the complex irrigation schedules needed to keep these precious plants thriving under the Egyptian sun. Scribes would likely be involved too, meticulously recording planting times, yields, and the distribution of these botanical treasures to the temple workshops. Historians still argue whether these temple gardens were solely for practical temple supply, fulfilling a purely utilitarian role, or if they also served as contemplative, sacred spaces for the priests and priestesses, places of peace and spiritual connection with nature, much like the later monastic cloister gardens of Europe. Given the Egyptian reverence for nature and order, it's easy to imagine them being both functional and deeply spiritual. One particularly fascinating aspect, though not grown in the garden itself, relies heavily on its produce, the perfumed cones. You've probably seen them in depictions of Egyptian banquets, guests with these curious cone-shaped objects sitting atop their wigs or heads. The prevailing theory is that these were made of animal fat or beeswax, impregnated with fragrant plant extracts, herbs, and flowers harvested from these very temple gardens. As the evening wore on and the festivities, well, heated up, the cone would slowly melt, releasing its perfume down the wearer's hair and shoulders. It's an ancient form of personal, time-release fragrance diffuser. It's a wonderfully quirky tidbit of Egyptian cosmetic practice, showing their dedication to being pleasantly scented even in a party situation. You can almost hear a high priestess muttering, "Honestly, if I have to smell one more unconed commoner at this banquet, I'm unleashing a plague of particularly odorous frogs." So, these gardens were far more than just pretty patches of green. They were the indispensable first link in a sacred chain of scent production. The quality of the incense, the potency of the healing salves, the divinity of the perfumes. It all began here, with carefully nurtured seeds, attentive hands, and the life-giving water of the Nile, now tamed and directed, the freshness of a lily, the pungency of freshly crushed mint, the delicate aroma of a lotus petal. These were the notes that would form the basis of complex compositions. From these meticulously tended plots, the fragrant harvest would be gathered and taken to the next crucial stage, the temple workshops, the sacred laboratories where the real alchemy of ancient Egyptian perfumery would begin. The journey from a simple bloom to a divine aroma is one of transformation, and the garden was its beautiful, fragrant cradle. The fragrant harvest from those meticulously tended temple gardens, the baskets brimming with lotus petals, freshly cut herbs, and aromatic roots, isn't going to magically transform itself into divine perfume or sacred incense just by sitting there looking pretty. Oh no, its journey continues, moving from the sun-drenched order of the gardens into the heart of the temple's creative core, the sacred laboratories, the perfumer's workshops. You follow the scent, which is becoming noticeably more intense, a complex medley that hints at the transformations taking place within. If the garden was a library of individual fragrant notes, this is the composer's studio, where those notes are blended into olfactory symphonies. Push aside a heavy linen curtain, and you step into a space that buzzes with quiet, focused activity. This isn't the grand, public space of the temple courts. This is a more secluded, functional area, yet it hums with its own kind of sacred energy. The air inside is thick, almost tangible, and with a kaleidoscope of aromas. One moment you catch the heavy sweetness of lily, the next the sharp tang of crushed mint, then the earthy depth of iris root, all underpinned by the faint, lingering smokiness of resins from previous concoctions. Your nose would probably throw a party, or perhaps file for early retirement after a few hours in here. The light is dimmer, filtered through high, small windows, perhaps augmented by the flickering glow of oil lamps, casting long shadows that dance around the figures working within. You see shelves lining the walls, crowded with an array of pottery jars, alabaster containers, and stone vessels of all shapes and sizes, each presumably holding a different precious ingredient or a work-in-progress perfume. Stone mortars and pestles of various dimensions are scattered on sturdy wooden tables, some stained with the vibrant colors of ancient flowers and herbs. There are linen cloths for straining, clay heating stands for gentle warming, and large vats where oils might be steeping with fragrant botanicals. It's a scene of both practical chemistry and profound artistry. This wasn't some ancient equivalent of a high street perfume counter with flashy bottles and aggressive sales assistants. It was more like a divine science lab combined with a very exclusive, incredibly fragrant ancient bakery, where the bread of heaven was, in fact, perfume. The individuals here, the perfumers, are often priests themselves, or at least highly specialized artisans working under priestly supervision. Their movements are deliberate, practiced, born of long experience and sacred knowledge. They might be garbed in simple, clean linen kilts, their focus absolute as they weigh, grind, sift, and blend. This isn't just a job, it's a calling, a sacred trust. They are the custodians of ancient recipes, the interpreters of divine olfactory preferences. Perhaps they offer a silent prayer to Nefertum, the god of perfumes, before beginning a particularly complex blend, asking for his guidance to ensure the fragrance is perfect, worthy of the gods or the noble deceased. The recipes themselves were often closely guarded secrets, passed down from master to apprentice, sometimes inscribed in hieroglyphs on temple walls for only the initiated to understand. Like those famously found at the temple of Edfu, which detail the preparation of various sacred oils and incenses. It adds a delicious layer of mystery, doesn't it? The recipe for our eternal bliss unguent. Oh, it's just a pinch of sun-dried hope, a whisper of Nile dew, and if I tell you the other 17 secret ingredients, the crocodiles get an early lunch. And it's you. The evidence for these perfume workshops isn't just textual. Archaeological digs in and around temple complexes have unearthed rooms with the telltale signs of perfume production. Traces of aromatic substances, specialized pottery, and tools. Reliefs on tomb walls, too, depict scenes of perfumers at work, pressing lilies in a sack tourniquet to extract their precious juice, or stirring ingredients in large cauldrons. These visual records are invaluable, offering us a glimpse into their ancient techniques. You'd see them using those heavy stone mortars to crush dried flowers or resins into fine powders. They'd employ finely woven linen to strain impurities from infused oils, ensuring a smooth, clear final product. Gentle heat, perhaps from a carefully controlled charcoal brazier, would be used to encourage reluctant oils to absorb the fragrances from plant matter during maceration. A particularly quirky detail to imagine is how they might have tested their trial blends. Without modern paper blotters, what did they use? Perhaps small slivers of papyrus, or dabbing a tiny amount onto a strip of clean linen, or even directly onto their own skin, letting the warmth of the body develop the scent, much like perfumers do today. Historians still argue whether the title perfumer, sometimes translated as unguent maker or incense roaster, denoted a distinct, independent profession in all periods of Egyptian history, or if it was a role often subsumed under broader priestly duties. Particularly when it came to the creation of the most sacred and ritually important scents. It's likely the lines were blurred, especially in earlier periods, with priests taking on these vital tasks as part of their service to the gods. The sheer skill involved is something to ponder. This wasn't just about following a recipe like an ancient Egyptian cookbook. It was about understanding the materials, how one scent would interact with another, which oils would best capture and preserve a delicate floral note, how long to steep ingredients for optimal fragrance without spoilage. It was an art of balance, of intuition, of profound familiarity with the natural world and its aromatic treasures. They were alchemists of aroma, transforming humble petals and sticky resins into elixirs fit for gods and pharaohs. The responsibility must have weighed heavily. One wrong ingredient, one misstep in the process, and an entire batch of precious perfume could be ruined. A costly mistake not just in terms of materials, but potentially in terms of divine favor. You can imagine a master perfumer, his brow furrowed in concentration, adding just one more drop of lotus extract to a blend, then inhaling deeply, his expression unreadable, before finally giving a subtle nod of satisfaction. Perfection, or at least good enough for the second-tier deities. The really good stuff was for the big guy, Osiris. These sacred labs, these bustling hubs of fragrant creation, were where the raw potential of the temple gardens was truly unlocked. Here, through painstaking effort and secret knowledge, the fleeting scents of nature were captured, concentrated, and transformed. The next step in our journey will be to delve into the specific techniques they employed, the clever methods these ancient perfumers devised to coax the very soul of scent from flower, herb, and resin. So, you're standing in that bustling, fragrant perfumer's workshop, surrounded by priests and artisans who hold the secrets to transforming humble garden blooms into divine essences. They have the knowledge, they have the dedication, but how exactly do they coax those fleeting, ethereal scent molecules out of a delicate lotus petal or a stubborn piece of resin? It's not like you can just politely ask a lily to decant its soul into a jar. This is where the ancient alchemy truly begins, using techniques that were surprisingly sophisticated, even if incredibly laborious. Capturing the soul of a scent, as they poetically might have put it, required ingenuity, patience, and a whole lot of elbow grease. Forget that fancy steam distillation you learned about in chemistry class. That was still millennia away. The Egyptians had their own clever methods. One of the cornerstone techniques you'd witness is maceration. Imagine a large, shallow pottery vessel filled with a neutral, high-quality oil, perhaps ben oil from the moringa tree, prized for its lack of scent and resistance to rancidity, or maybe balanos oil, even castor oil in some applications. Into this oil, the perfumers carefully submerge quantities of fragrant plant material, flower petals like those from the blue lotus or white lily, chopped aromatic woods, or crushed herbs. This mixture might then be gently warmed, perhaps by placing the vessel in the sun or near a very carefully controlled, low-heat source. The warmth encourages the oil to absorb the volatile aromatic compounds from the plant matter. It's a slow dance, this warm embrace between oil and flower. Too hot, and you'd cook the delicate scent into oblivion, ending up with something smelling less like divine perfume and more like a floral stew gone wrong. Too cool, and the infusion would be weak and inefficient. Historians still argue about the exact temperatures and durations used in warm maceration for different botanicals, a testament to the empirical skill these ancient perfumers developed through generations of trial and error. After a set period, the now spent plant material would be strained out, often using fine linen cloths and fresh material added to the same oil, repeating the process several times until the oil was richly saturated with fragrance. This wasn't a quick spritz-and-go operation, this was commitment. Then there was a technique that was a precursor to what later became known as enfleurage, particularly for the most delicate flowers whose scents were easily destroyed by heat. In this cold process, layers of purified animal fat, perhaps ox tallow, meticulously cleaned to remove any hint of its original, farmyard aroma, would be spread onto flat trays, maybe made of wood or pottery. Fresh flower petals, like jasmine or tuberose if they had access to them or similar delicate blooms, would then be carefully laid upon the fat. Over hours or even days, the fat, acting like a silent scented sponge, would absorb the fragrance from the petals. The exhausted petals would then be painstakingly removed by hand and replaced with fresh ones again and again and again. It's a process demanding immense patience and a gentle touch. Can you imagine the quiet focus required? Waiting for that jasmine to finally surrender its fragrant soul to the unctuous fat, it's definitely not a job for the impatient. Probably why a lot of priests were known for their rather serene, almost sleepy demeanor. They were just recovering from a week of changing lotus petals. The resulting perfumed fat, known as a pomade, could then be used as is, or the fragrance could be further extracted from the fat using alcohol, though the widespread use of alcohol as a solvent in perfumery came much later. For some ingredients, particularly certain flowers like the ubiquitous lily, a more direct approach was used pressing. You've probably seen depictions of this in tomb paintings. It often involved the rather strenuous-looking sack press, or tourniquet press. Large quantities of flowers would be placed in a strong linen sack. This sack would then have wooden poles inserted at either end. Two or more perfumers would then twist these poles in opposite directions, wringing the sack with immense force, much like you'd wring out a wet towel, but on a much larger and more flower-flattening scale. Forget your morning spin class. A shift on the lily press would give you a workout that would make a Roman gladiator weep. The precious liquid, a mixture of floral juice and essential oils, would be squeezed out and collected. This juice could then be allowed to settle, the fragrant oils perhaps separating, or it might be directly incorporated into other preparations. Resins like frankincense and myrrh, those gifts from distant lands that you recall from the temple incense, presented a different challenge, and these weren't typically pressed from fresh. The trees themselves were bled, incisions made in the bark, from which the aromatic resin would weep and harden into tears. These tears were then collected, sorted by quality, and could be ground into powder for incense, or dissolved, often with the help of gentle heat, into oils or fats to create fragrant unguents. Their rich balsamic scents were highly valued for their complexity and their perceived sacred properties. It's important to remember what they didn't have. Without steam distillation, they couldn't produce the highly concentrated essential oils we're familiar with today. Their perfumes were primarily oil-based infusions, fragrant pomades, or dry incense mixtures. Yet, through these laborious hands-on methods, they achieved remarkable results. A quirky little detail to consider is the quality of the linen used for straining and maceration or pressing. A coarser weave might let through too much particulate matter, while too fine a weave might be overly slow or absorb too much of the precious oil. Perhaps master perfumers had their preferred linen suppliers, just as a modern chef might have a favorite knife maker. Some scholars even suggest that perfumers might have had specific minor rituals or incantations they performed during these delicate extraction processes. A quiet word to coax the scent spirit from its botanical home, though concrete evidence for this is, like the scents themselves, rather elusive. These ancient alchemists of aroma, through pressing, steeping, and patiently waiting for fat to do its fragrant work, managed to capture the very essence of Egypt's botanical wealth. The resulting concentrated oils and pomades were the building blocks, the precious heart notes and enduring base notes, ready to be used on their own or artfully blended into the complex and legendary perfumes that scented both daily life and the path to eternity. One of the most famous of these, purify, awaits our attention. You've witnessed the patient art of coaxing fragrant souls from flowers and resins, the meticulous pressing and steeping happening within those sacred temple workshops. These extracted oils and perfumed fats were potent treasures in their own right, ready to anoint statues, scent the living, and prepare the dead. But sometimes, these individual essences were destined for something even greater. A composition so complex and revered it became legendary, the sacred incense known as purify. If Egyptian perfumery was an orchestra, purify was its grand, soul-stirring symphony. a fragrance that could lull earthly anxieties and allegedly open pathways to the divine. You might need a PhD in ancient botany and a direct line to Thoth, the god of wisdom, just to decipher its ingredient list, let alone replicate it. Kiffy wasn't just one thing. It was a carefully compounded mixture, primarily known as an incense. But its uses and forms were varied. Its name itself is thought to derive from the Egyptian word kapti, meaning a substance for fumigation or incense. Imagine yourself in the temple as dusk begins to settle, the shadows lengthening across the hieroglyphed walls. A priest, perhaps one of those serene individuals you saw earlier, painstakingly changing lotus petals for enfleurage, now approaches a brazier. He carefully places small pellets or a molded cone of a dark, resinous substance onto the glowing embers. As it begins to smolder, a rich, complex aroma unfurls, utterly unlike any single floral scent. It's a warm, sweet, and deeply soothing fragrance, perhaps with notes of wine-soaked raisins, the grounding earthiness of myrrh, the bright clarity of frankincense, a hint of juniper's sharpness, and the sweet spice of cassia or cinnamon, all interwoven with a dozen other subtle nuances. It's a scent designed to calm the heart, clear the mind, and elevate the spirit. Think of it as the ancient Egyptian equivalent of a super complex artisanal herbal tea blend, but instead of just sipping it, you breathed its soul. And it was meant to lull not just mortals, but also the gods themselves into a state of tranquil contemplation. The recipes for kai-fi, or at least lists of its ingredients, have come down to us through various sources. Temple walls at Edfu and Philae bear hieroglyphic instructions, and classical writers like Plutarch, Dioscorides, and Galen all described it, sometimes with slight variations, which isn't surprising given the secrecy and regional differences. A typical kaifi recipe, if typical can even be applied to such an enigma, might include a daunting list of 16 or more ingredients. You'd find the usual suspects frankincense and myrrh, of course. Then things like mastic resin, juniper berries, sweet flag calamus, cypress grass or souchet, spikenard, cassia, and perhaps even a touch of bitumen or asphalt. Yes, that sticky black stuff, which adds a rather intriguing smoky depth. To sweeten and bind the mixture, ingredients like raisins often soaked in wine first, honey, and sometimes dates were incorporated. The sheer number of components speaks to the Egyptians' profound understanding of how different aromatics could synergize, creating a blend far greater than the sum of its parts. While the ingredient lists are somewhat known, the precise proportions, the specific preparation methods for each component, and any accompanying ritual utterances were often fiercely guarded secrets of the temple priesthood. Imagine trying to get the exact recipe from a kaifi master. For the sacred temple blend first, you must speak kindly to the frankincense for 3 moons. Then, the myrrh must only be ground by a left-handed scribe who dreams of ibises. And the raisins, they must be serenaded by a choir of... You get the idea. It wasn't just about chucking everything into a pot. The preparation was itself a ritual. A painstaking process that could take days, even weeks. Ingredients would be meticulously sorted, cleaned, ground, sieved, soaked, sometimes boiled or gently heated, then expertly combined in a specific order. Plutarch describes a multi-stage process where ingredients were pounded separately and then mixed, with sacred texts being read aloud as the perfumers worked. It was an act of devotion, an olfactory meditation. The primary use of kaifi was as a temple incense, burned in the evening to purify the sacred space, to honor the gods as they prepared for their nocturnal journey, and to create an atmosphere conducive to peace and divine communion. It was said to prepare priests for dream incubation or for receiving divine messages. Its soothing qualities were also highly valued for funerary rites. The smoke of kaifi would fill the tomb, creating a calming passage for the deceased and ensuring their olfactory comfort on their journey into the duat. But its applications didn't stop there. Plutarch famously wrote that Kaifi was used as a potent medicine and a sort of ancient tranquilizer. He claimed it could lull to sleep, allay anxieties, and brighten dreams. It was sometimes formed into small pellets or pastilles and taken internally to calm the nerves or treat ailments of the lungs and liver. Its fragrance was so pervasive and pleasant that simply being in a room where it was prepared or burned would allow the scent to cling to clothing, acting as a subtle personal perfume. One of the more quirky tidbits surrounding Kaifi production is the belief by some that the ingredients needed to be happy or treated with respect to yield their best qualities, or that the compounding process was best undertaken during specific lunar phases, perhaps when the moon was waxing, to imbue the incense with properties of growth and benevolent power. The inclusion of ingredients like asphalt or bitumen is also a point of fascination and debate. Historians still argue about the potential psychoactive properties of Kaifi. While some of the known ingredients like calamus or spikenard have mild sedative or mood-altering effects in certain preparations, it's debated whether a typical Kaifi blend would have been genuinely hallucinogenic, or if its profound calming and dream-enhancing effects were largely psychosomatic. Born from its rich, complex aroma, the ritual context of its use, and the deeply ingrained belief in its power, the mystery certainly adds to its allure. Kaifi stands as a testament to the pinnacle of ancient Egyptian aromatic artistry. It embodies their sophisticated knowledge of botanicals, their mastery of blending, and the seamless integration of scent into their spiritual, medicinal, and even their daily lives. This complex and holy smoke was more than just a perfume. It was a tool for transformation, a fragrant bridge between the human and the divine, the living and the dead. And while Kaifi represented the height of ritualistic scent, the love for fragrance in ancient Egypt wasn't confined to temple walls or solemn tombs. It permeated every level of society, bringing a touch of the divine, or at least a pleasant aroma, to the everyday, that complex holy smoke of Kaifi, coiling its way through temple corridors and into the very fabric of Egyptian spirituality, certainly set a high bar for aromatic excellence. It was the haute couture of the scent world, reserved for the gods and the most solemn occasions. But don't for a moment think that the appreciation for good smells was confined to priests in shadowy sanctuaries or mummies on their way to meet Osiris. Oh no. The love for perfume, for being pleasantly fragrant, trickled down from the divine and permeated every level of ancient Egyptian society where affordability allowed. For the living, smelling good wasn't just a divine aspiration, it was an integral part of daily hygiene, a clear marker of social standing, and, of course, a potent tool in the timeless game of seduction. Body odor, in that warm climate, was probably considered a sign you'd seriously offended a minor god of freshness, and nobody wanted that kind of divine disapproval. Imagine yourself as an ancient Egyptian, perhaps a moderately well-to-do artisan or a scribe. Starting your day. Personal hygiene was incredibly important, especially given the heat and dust. You'd likely begin with a cleansing ritual, perhaps using natron, a naturally occurring soda ash, as a sort of soap, followed by a refreshing rinse with water hauled from the Nile or a nearby well. But the process didn't end there. Your skin, now clean but potentially dry from the sun and the arid air, would crave moisture and protection. And this is where scented oils and unguents came into daily play. After bathing, you would anoint your body with fragrant oils. These weren't just perfumes in the modern sense of a light spritz. They were nourishing concoctions that moisturized the skin, provided a barrier against the harsh environment, and, crucially, left you smelling rather delightful. It was the ancient Egyptian equivalent of a luxurious body lotion, aftershave, and cologne all rolled into one. The types of scents varied. Perhaps a simple infusion of lilies or chamomile and moringa oil for someone of modest means. For the wealthier echelons of society, the nobles, high officials, and royalty, the perfumes would be far more complex and exotic. Think of those intricate blends crafted in the temple workshops, perhaps using imported myrrh or spikenard, layered with local floral notes. To smell expensive was to be perceived as sophisticated, powerful, and blessed by the gods. Tomb paintings are a fantastic window into this aspect of life. You'll frequently see vibrant banquet scenes where guests, adorned in their finest white linen, are being attended to by servants. These attendants are often depicted anointing the guests with perfumes from delicate jars or placing those intriguing scented cones. Remember those from our garden visit, on their heads or wigs? These cones, made of scented fat or wax, would slowly melt in the warmth of the gathering, releasing their fragrance and literally bathing the wearer in perfume. It was a very visible, very fragrant display of status and indulgence. You probably couldn't throw a papyrus scroll at a party without hitting someone wearing at least 3 different kinds of perfume and a slowly dripping head cone. And where there's perfume, there's romance. The ancient Egyptians were as susceptible to the allure of a captivating scent as any culture before or since. Love poetry from the period is often surprisingly explicit and evocative, and scent frequently plays a starring role. A lover might praise the fragrance of their beloved's skin, comparing it to the most precious perfumes like myrrh or lotus. Your scent is more captivating than frankincense, one might whisper, or perhaps something a little more direct if the beer was flowing freely. Specific fragrances were likely associated with attraction and desire. The heady aroma of the blue lotus, with its connections to creation and sensuality, was almost certainly a popular choice for a romantic encounter. An ancient Egyptian dating profile, if such a thing had existed on a clay tablet, might well have read, "Must love cats, enjoy long walks by the Nile, and be liberally anointed with essence of blue lotus. Bonus points for owning a non-melty perfume cone." The use of these scented products was widespread. We find countless cosmetic containers, elegant little pots and jars carved from alabaster, diorite, or faience, in tombs belonging to both men and women of status. These weren't just empty vessels. Analysis often reveals traces of the fragrant oils and unguents they once held, a testament to their importance both in life and as provisions for a well-scented afterlife. A particularly delightful and quirky tidbit is the attention paid to scenting wigs. Many ancient Egyptians, both male and female, shaved their heads for cleanliness and to avoid lice, a sensible precaution. Really. They then wore elaborate wigs made of human hair, horsehair, or plant fibers, especially for formal occasions. These wigs weren't just fashion statements. They were often meticulously styled and, yes, perfumed, either by having scented fats worked into them or by being stored with fragrant herbs. Imagine the dedication, not just perfuming your body, but your detachable hair too. Historians still argue about the true accessibility of these perfumed products to the very lowest classes of society. We're simple. Locally sourced scented oils and fats are relatively common comfort, perhaps made at home using readily available flowers and herbs steeped in castor oil. Or was any form of deliberate perfuming beyond basic cleanliness a luxury largely confined to the more affluent middle and upper echelons? It's likely there was a spectrum, with the quality, complexity, and exoticism of the ingredients being the primary differentiator. Even a worker toiling on the pyramids might have appreciated a simple floral infusion to soothe sunburnt skin and feel a little more human at the end of a long day, if they could procure it. So, these mortal scents were far more than just a frivolous indulgence. They were woven into the fabric of daily rituals, signifying cleanliness, status, and allure. They were a way to feel good, to present oneself confidently to the world, and to engage the senses in a culture that deeply appreciated beauty and fragrance in all its forms. From the grandest noble to, perhaps, the humble farmer, the desire to be surrounded by pleasant aromas was a shared human experience, expressed with varying degrees of luxury but with a common understanding of sense power. This appreciation for scented adornment didn't just stop at general body perfume. It extended into the very specific world of cosmetics. You've embraced the idea that smelling good was a daily essential in ancient Egypt, from the general anointing with fragrant oils after your morning dip in, or near the Nile, to the subtle scent of perfumed wigs at a lively banquet. But the Egyptian dedication to scented beauty didn't just stop at making sure their skin and hair carried a pleasant aroma. Oh no. They took it a step further, integrating fragrance into the very cosmetics that adorned their faces, turning the act of putting on your face into an even more olfactorily delightful experience. This wasn't just about looking good, it was about smelling divine from every pore, every kohl-lined eyelash. Let's start with the most iconic of Egyptian cosmetic statements: kohl. That dramatic dark eyeliner that gave Egyptian eyes their instantly recognizable almond-shaped allure wasn't just a fashion trend that endured for millennia, it was a multi-purpose marvel. You've seen it in countless depictions, from mighty pharaohs to elegant queens, from statues of gods to humble tomb paintings of everyday folk. The primary ingredient for the classic black coal was galena, a lead sulfide, ground into a fine powder. For a fashionable green alternative, powdered malachite, a copper carbonate, did the trick. This powder would then be mixed with a little water, or more commonly, with oil or fat to create a paste or a stick that could be easily applied. And application was an art form in itself. Imagine yourself, armed with a slender coal stick made of wood, ivory, or stone, carefully outlining your eyes. One tiny slip, one unexpected sneeze, and you'd be sporting the surprised badger look for the rest of the day instead of that enigmatic gaze of a desert deity. The skill involved was considerable. Now, was this coal itself deliberately scented? This is where things get a little hazy, and it's a topic historians gently nudge each other about at academic tea parties. The primary minerals, galena and malachite, aren't inherently fragrant. However, the fats or oils used as a binding agent could certainly have been perfumed. Imagine that same care taken to infuse moringa oil with lily or chamomile for body anointing being applied to the oil destined for your coal pot. It's plausible that a subtle, pleasing scent might have been part of the coal experience, even if its main purpose was visual and protective. The mainstream fact is that coal was used by both men and women across various social strata, primarily for its aesthetic appeal but also for its perceived practical benefits. It was believed to reduce sun glare, a very real issue in the bright Egyptian desert, and some recent research suggests that the lead-based compounds could have stimulated the production of nitric oxide in the eyes, boosting the immune response and helping to prevent eye infections. So, looking fabulous and warding off evil eye germs, all in one. Beyond kohl, other cosmetics received the scented touch. Rouge for the cheeks and lip stains, often made from red ochre ground into a powder and mixed with fat or oil, could easily have incorporated fragrant essences. A hint of myrrh in your lip balm, perhaps, or a floral note in the blush that brought a healthy glow to your cheeks. It's certainly in keeping with their overall love for perfumery, while direct evidence for heavily scented makeup items can be elusive. The principle of using scented fats and oils as a base for these cosmetics makes it a strong possibility. The Egyptians weren't ones to miss an opportunity to add another layer of fragrance to their daily routines. And now, let's revisit those rather fabulous and slightly baffling perfume cones you've seen at banquets. We touched upon them as status symbols, slowly melting atop elaborate wigs. But let's imagine the actual experience. These weren't just lumps of randomly scented grease, they were carefully crafted concoctions. The base was typically animal fat, likely purified ox tallow or sometimes beeswax, chosen for its ability to hold scent and melt at a slow, predictable rate, hopefully. Into this base, perfumers would blend a variety of fragrances. Drawing on the riches of those temple gardens and perfume workshops we've explored, think of myrrh for its warmth, cinnamon for a touch of spice, perhaps chamomile for a softer note, or the ever-popular lotus and lily for that classic Egyptian floral signature. The cone, solidified and shaped, would be placed on the head. As the wearer moved and the ambient temperature of a crowded, lively feast hall rose, the cone would begin its gentle descent. Liquefying from the base upwards, a trickle of perfumed oil would then run down the wig or hair, onto the neck and shoulders, releasing its fragrance continuously throughout the event. It was the original wearable, personal aromatherapy diffuser, just a tad drippy. You can imagine it might have offered a slight cooling sensation as the scented oils evaporated, a welcome relief in a warm environment. One quirky thought, imagine the social dynamics. Oh, Lady Merit, is that the new Breath of Hathor cone? Simply divine mine is desert sunset, but I fear it's melting a bit too enthusiastically towards the roasted duck. Historians still debate the precise recipe and consistency of these cones. Were they always solid fat? Or sometimes a softer, piled up unguent? And was the primary olfactory benefit for the wearer? Or was it designed to create a fragrant aura that enveloped nearby guests as well? Perhaps it was both, a personal indulgence and a contribution to the overall aromatic ambiance of the celebration. The image is undeniably luxurious and a little comical to our modern sensibilities. The original hot mess, but in a very chic, fragrant, ancient Egyptian way. This holistic approach, where cosmetics and perfumes were not separate categories but intertwined aspects of beauty and personal presentation, underscores the Egyptian commitment to a multi-sensory experience of life. It wasn't enough to have a dramatic, kohl-lined eye. That kohl, or at least the ritual surrounding its application, might also carry a subtle hint of sacred scent. It wasn't enough to wear fine linen. That linen was best enjoyed when your perfume cone was gently anointing it with essence of lotus. Every element contributed to an overall aura of cleanliness, divinity, and, of course, smelling absolutely heavenly. These practices adorned the living, making their earthly existence more beautiful and fragrant. But the ultimate perfuming, the most vital aromatic preparations, were reserved for the journey that awaited everyone the passage into the afterlife. You've adorned your living self with the finest kohl, perhaps a subtle blush of ochre, and that ever-so-fashionable, slowly melting perfume cone that announces your arrival with a gentle waft of myrrh and lotus. You are, to put it mildly, smelling divine in the land of the living. But what happens when your time mingling with mortals, attending those lively banquets, and trying not to sneeze while applying eyeliner comes to an end? For the ancient Egyptians, this was not a fragrant full stop, but rather the beginning of the most crucial aromatic journey of all. The preparation of the body for eternity, the intricate process of mummification, was imbued with powerful scents, not just to make the deceased presentable, but to preserve, protect, and sanctify them for their voyage into the duat. This wasn't just a spa day for the dearly departed, it was an extreme makeover, eternity edition, with a very heavy emphasis on deep, resinous conditioning. The core belief, as you know, was that the physical body, the Sa, needed to be preserved to house the Ka life force and base soul-like personality in the afterlife. If the body decayed, the spirit had nowhere to return, jeopardizing eternal existence. So, mummification was serious business. And scent, it turns out, played a starring, multifaceted role. It wasn't just about masking the inevitable odors of, well, no longer being alive. The aromatic substances used were chosen for their potent preservative qualities, their perceived sacred power, and their ability to transform the deceased into a fragrant, godlike being, ensuring you smelled good for eternity. That's one afterlife insurance policy that really cost an arm and a leg, and probably your liver too, at least temporarily. Imagine yourself now, not as a participant in life's fragrant rituals, but as an observer in the wabed, the pure place, or the embalmer's workshop, often a temporary tented structure set up near the Nile or the necropolis. The air here is thick with a very different kind of aromatic intensity than the perfumer's lab. It's heavy, resinous, almost medicinal, yet undeniably sacred. The chief embalmer, a priest known as the Hairy Seshta, or overseer of the mystery, and his assistants are at work, The first step after washing the body, often with palm wine, which itself has a slightly sweet scent and cleansing properties, is the removal of the internal organs. These, the liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines, were typically washed, often with more palm wine, then packed with fragrant and preservative substances like crushed myrrh and cassia, before being placed into their respective canopic jars, each guarded by one of the four sons of Horus. The heart, considered the seat of intellect and emotion, was usually left in the body, perhaps with a protective, scented amulet placed upon it. Then comes the packing of the empty body cavity. This wasn't just stuffed with old rags. It was filled with a mixture of aromatic and absorbent materials. Bundles of linen, sawdust, often cedar sawdust for its scent and preservative oils, and generous quantities of powdered resins like myrrh and frankincense, along with spices such as cassia or cinnamon. These weren't just for show. Their antibacterial and antifungal properties would help inhibit decay from within. The Greek historian Herodotus, who gave us one of the most detailed, if sometimes slightly embellished accounts of mummification, describes this practice. Modern scientific analysis of mummy residues and embalming caches, using fancy techniques like gas chromatography mass spectrometry, has confirmed the extensive use of these very resins and spices, matching specific chemical biomarkers back to their botanical sources. It's ancient history meeting modern science in a rather fragrant way. After the crucial 70-day drying period in natron, which desiccated the body, the real anointing and perfuming began. The now shrunken, leathery but preserved body would be carefully washed again, and then lavished with truly copious amounts of expensive scented oils and resins. Cedarwood oil, prized for its potent preservative and insect-repelling qualities, as well as its clean, enduring scent, was a key ingredient. Myrrh, with its warm, balsamic aroma and strong antimicrobial action, was used extensively. Frankincense, symbolizing purity and divinity, would also feature. These weren't applied sparingly. The body was massaged with them, the skin literally saturated to make it supple and fragrant. The aim was to create an incorruptible and sweet-smelling vessel for the spirit. The embalmer's tent, with all this intense activity and these powerful substances, must have had an olfactory signature that could knock a camel over at 50 paces. The original essential oil diffusers in there must have been working some serious overtime. Even the linen bandages used to wrap the mummy, hundreds of yards of them, were often treated. Sometimes they were soaked in resinous solutions, or had liquefied resin poured over them as they were applied. Layer by painstaking layer, small, potent amulets, often bearing sacred symbols and perhaps anointed with their own specific scents, would be tucked within the folds of the wrappings at strategic points, offering magical protection and a little extra aromatic boost for the journey. One particularly quirky tidbit is the sheer quantity of these valuable resins that could be expended on a single royal or very wealthy individual, sometimes amounting to hundreds of pounds. We're talking a serious investment in posthumous perfumery. Historians still argue about the primary motivation for using such vast quantities of these expensive imported materials. Was it purely for their empirically observed preservative and antimicrobial effects? Or was the symbolic and ritualistic power of their sacred aromas, transforming the deceased into a being akin to the fragrant gods, considered equally, if not more, important for ensuring a successful passage into the afterlife? It was likely an inseparable blend of the practical and the profoundly spiritual. The goal of all this aromatic effort was to ensure the deceased arrived in the hall of judgment not as a decaying corpse, but as a divinely fragrant and magically protected entity, ready to face Osiris and the weighing of the heart. To be sweet-smelling was to be pure, to be akin to the gods, to be acceptable. The powerful, sacred scents of myrrh, cedar, and frankincense were the final olfactory seal on a life lived and a death well prepared for, an eternal perfume to accompany the soul into the field of reeds. With the body now perfectly preserved and exuding an aura of sanctity, it was ready for its final earthly placement. But the aromatic preparations didn't quite end there. Your eternal self, now a perfectly preserved and divinely fragrant saw, is ready. The intense, sacred aromas of myrrh, cedarwood, and frankincense have transformed you from mere mortal remains into a being fit for the afterlife. But this meticulously prepared mummy isn't just going to be left in an empty room. Oh no. The ancient Egyptians understood that the journey through the duat and existence in the field of reeds required provisions. And not just any provisions. Alongside the symbolic food offerings, the miniature boats, and the essential Ushapti figures to do your celestial chores, your tomb, your house for eternity, would be stocked with an abundance of perfumes, scented oils, and incense. You wouldn't want to arrive in the afterlife only to realize you forgot your millennia supply of moisturizing unguent. Would you talk about an eternal faux pas? Imagine yourself, now as a spirit, observing the final ceiling of your tomb. It's not a dark, barren prison, but a carefully curated environment designed to support your ka and bai. The air itself, at least initially, would be thick with the combined fragrances of the tomb goods. A final, comforting blanket of familiar and sacred scents. Why such an emphasis on aromatic provisions? Well, in the Egyptian worldview, the needs of the dead were remarkably similar to the needs of the living, just on a more spiritual plane. If you enjoyed being clean, moisturized, and pleasantly scented in life, your spirit would appreciate the same in eternity. These weren't just luxury items, they were considered vital for maintaining your divine status. For performing your own rituals in the afterlife, perhaps anointing yourself before meeting a deity, and for ensuring your continued well-being and favor with the gods you'd encounter. It's like stocking a celestial spa and a beauty counter, ensuring you had everything for your eternal self-care routine. The sheer quantity and quality of perfumes found in undisturbed tombs, most famously that of Tutankhamun, is astonishing. Howard Carter and his team unearthed numerous exquisitely crafted vessels, jars of luminous alabaster, pots of vibrant blue faience, even containers of gold and silver, many still sealed, holding the remnants of the precious scented oils and unguents they contained over 3,000 years ago. In some cases, upon opening, a faint, ghostly aroma was reportedly still detectable, a fleeting whisper from the distant past. Analysis of these residues has revealed the familiar cast of characters: frankincense, myrrh, spikenard, various floral-infused oils, and complex fats. These weren't just dumped in a corner, they were carefully arranged, valuable possessions for an eternal existence. You'd find jars clearly labeled, perhaps indicating the type of oil or the festival it was intended for in the afterlife's ceremonial calendar. There would be solid perfumes or pomades, little cakes of fragrant fat ready to be applied, cones of incense, like kai-fi or simpler resinous mixtures, would be present, along with bags of raw frankincense tears or myrrh pellets, ready for burning on the incense burners also provided. Even though fresh floral collars and garlands would quickly wither, their depictions on tomb walls in the presence of dried botanical matter show that these too were part of the desired aromatic environment. This practice wasn't merely about ensuring you smelled nice for Osiris. These scented provisions had deep symbolic significance. They represented purity, divinity, and the continuation of a refined existence. To be surrounded by beautiful fragrances was to be in a state of grace. One of the most fascinating discoveries for Egyptologists is the frequent mention and inclusion of the 7 sacred oils, or sometimes 10, depending on the period and source. This was a specific, ritualistic set of unguents, each with its own name and purpose, used during the opening of the mouth ceremony, a vital rite performed on the mummy or a statue of the deceased to restore its senses for the afterlife, and also included as provisions within the tomb. The list typically included oils like Seti Heb festival scent, Hekenu praise oil, Seifetje, a sacred oil whose exact origin is debated, Nichinem, another oil of uncertain composition, Tewat, similarly enigmatic, Hatton Ash prime cedar oil, and hat and chehenu prime Libyan oil, possibly olive. Each was presented in a specific order, with specific incantations. Knowing the names and correct application of these oils was probably on the final exam for entering the field of reeds. Historians still engage in lively debate about whether the sheer volume of perfumes provided in some wealthy tombs was purely symbolic, a grand gesture of piety and status, or if there was a more literal belief that the ka could somehow consume or draw sustenance from the ethereal essence of these fragrances over the vast expanse of eternity. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between, a powerful symbol with an underlying hope for tangible spiritual benefit. The quantities could be immense. Forget packing an extra pair of sandals. Did you pack enough myrrh-infused oil to last until the sun burns out? That was the kind of long-term planning involved. The tomb, once sealed, became a time capsule, and these aromatic substances played a crucial role in creating and maintaining its sacred atmosphere. The initial combined scent of all those oils, resins, and dried flowers would have been potent, gradually mellowing over centuries, but ideally leaving a trace of sanctity. You wouldn't want your eternal home to get musty, after all. The care taken in selecting, preparing, and storing these fragrant provisions speaks volumes about the Egyptian reverence for the afterlife and their profound belief in the power of scent to transcend the boundary between the earthly and the divine. These weren't just afterthoughts, they were as essential as the food offerings, the magical spells from the Book of the Dead, and the tomb itself. They were the perfumes of passage, the scents of eternity, ensuring that the deceased was not only remembered, but also aromatically equipped for whatever lay beyond. Understanding what these individual scents meant, their specific symbolic language, is our next step into this fragrant hereafter. You're now comfortably settled in your eternal house, the tomb, surrounded by an impressive collection of fragrant provisions. Those alabaster jars brimming with scented oils, the little pots of unguents, the cache of kaifi pellets, they're not just there to make your afterlife smell a bit nicer than, say, a dusty attic. The ancient Egyptians didn't choose these specific aromas willy-nilly. Each fragrance, each resin, each delicate floral note was steeped in meaning. A fragrant hieroglyph in a complex symbolic language understood by mortals and, more importantly, by the gods. It was an ancient olfactory emoji system, a whiff of lotus for feeling reborn, a plume of frankincense for feeling holy today, or the sturdy scent of cedar, meaning I'm built to last, thank you very much. Understanding this language of scent was key to navigating the afterlife successfully. Let's start with one of the most iconic and beloved scents of ancient Egypt, the blue lotus, or Nymphaea caerulea. You've encountered it on the Nile, in temple gardens, and as a desired perfume, its symbolism was profound and multifaceted, because the blue lotus flower opens its petals each morning to the sun and closes them each evening. Sinking beneath the water, it was a powerful emblem of creation, rebirth, and the daily journey of the sun god Ra. The famous image of the young Tutankhamun's head emerging from a lotus flower beautifully captures this idea of regeneration. Its clean, slightly sweet, ethereal fragrance was thus associated with new life, purity, and divine connection. Nefertum, the god of perfume, was literally born from a blue lotus. To be surrounded by its scent was to be enveloped in the promise of eternal renewal. Then there's the stately white lily, often a general term for various fragrant white blooms, including Nymphea lotus. Its pristine white petals spoke of purity and majesty. It was often associated with fertility and abundance, perhaps due to its lush growth along the Nile, and was sometimes linked to Hapi, the god of the Nile's inundation. Its heady, sweet perfume would have evoked a sense of regal purity and the richness of life, a fitting fragrance for both queens and those hoping for a bountiful existence in the field of reeds. Now, let's delve into the heavyweights of the sacred resin world. Myrrh, that warm, balsamic, slightly bitter resin from the Commiphora tree, was practically synonymous with funerary rites. Its use in embalming, as you witnessed, was extensive. This wasn't just for its preservative qualities. Symbolically, myrrh represented enduring life, healing, and purification. Its scent was thought to be protective, capable of sanctifying the body and preparing it for its encounter with Osiris, the lord of the underworld, who himself was associated with myrrh. There's a certain gravitas to the aroma of myrrh, a sense of sacred stillness and profound transformation. Is this myrrh for eternal life? Or did someone just have a really bad cold they were trying to keep at bay for eternity? Given their medical beliefs, maybe both. Hot on its heels is frankincense. The golden tears of the Boswellia sacra tree. If myrrh spoke of the sacredness of death and preservation, frankincense sang of divinity, purity, and the bridge between the earthly and the celestial. Its bright, clean, resinous smoke was seen as a direct conduit for prayers ascending to the heavens, particularly to sun gods like Ra. It was used to purify temple spaces, to repel malevolent forces, and to signify the presence of the divine. To be censed with frankincense was to be cleansed and consecrated. Its uplifting aroma was the olfactory equivalent of stepping into a sunbeam after a long period of darkness. Osiris probably had a top 10 heavenly scents list, and you really wanted to be wearing something featuring frankincense when you queued up for the final judgment. And we mustn't forget cedarwood, likely from the prized cedars of Lebanon. The wood itself was used for temple doors, sacred boats for the gods, and high-status coffins precisely because of its resistance to decay and its wonderfully clean, enduring aroma. Symbolically, cedar represented incorruptibility, strength, and eternal life. The oil extracted from it carried these same connotations, making it a favored ingredient in anointing oils for mummification and for sacred objects. Its scent was a steadfast reminder of enduring presence, a fragrant shield against the forces of decay and oblivion. These key players formed the core of the symbolic scent palette, but many other fragrances added their own nuances. Cinnamon and cassia, exotic imports, might have signified warmth, luxury, and perhaps offered their own protective qualities. Juniper berries, often found in body cavities of mummies, were associated with purification. Even the humbler scents from the temple gardens, like mint or marjoram, could carry meanings of freshness, healing, or the comforting domesticity one hoped to replicate in the afterlife. The overall idea was often apotropaic, that strong, pure, or sacred smells could actively repel evil spirits, negative energies, or the chaotic forces that threatened the cosmic order of Ma'at. Burning incense wasn't just an offering, it was spiritual fumigation, cleansing the path ahead. One rather quirky area to ponder is whether there was a specific, ideal scent profile for the field of reeds itself. Did the ancient Egyptians imagine it perpetually smelling of lotus and frankincense, a kind of celestial spa? Or perhaps wearing a particular combination of scents upon arrival could grant you favor with a lesser-known gatekeeper deity of the Duat. Ah, you're wearing the Anubis's Delight blend. Right this way, please. Historians still debate the precise nuances of scent symbolism across different dynasties, regions, and even social strata in Egypt. Was the meaning of, say, spikenard universally understood from the Delta to Nubia, or did local traditions imbue it with unique significance that might now be lost to us? And how much of this complex symbolism was truly grasped by the average farmer compared to the highly educated priest or scribe? This intricate language of scents, from the life-affirming perfume of the blue lotus to the divine aroma of frankincense, created a rich, multi-sensory tapestry that permeated every aspect of Egyptian life and death. These fragrant symbols weren't just abstract ideas. They were experienced, inhaled, and believed to have tangible power. And such precious, meaningful essences naturally deserved equally worthy containers to house them, both in this life and the next. You've now begun to understand the profound symbolic language of those ancient Egyptian scents. The lotus whispering of rebirth, frankincense carrying prayers to the heavens, Myrrh, promising preservation. Each aroma in your well-stocked afterlife pantry had its purpose, its sacred meaning, but such precious and potent substances. These nectars of the gods and elixirs of eternity couldn't just be sloshed into any old pot. Oh no, the containers themselves had to be worthy of their fragrant contents, designed not only to protect and preserve these volatile treasures, but also to reflect their immense value and sacred nature. The craftsmanship lavished on Egyptian perfume vessels is a silent testament to how deeply they revered these aromatic essences. Some of these ancient jars are so exquisitely beautiful, they make modern designer fragrance bottles look like something you'd keep your window cleaner in. Imagine yourself in an artisan's workshop, not one filled with the heady aromas of perfume creation, but one ringing with the gentle tap 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 of carving tools or glowing with the heat of a kiln. Here, skilled hands transform humble stone, clay, or shimmering faience into vessels fit for the gods. Alabaster, or more accurately, calcite, was a highly favored material, especially for higher status perfumes. Its cool, smooth surface, its beautiful translucency often veined with subtle milky patterns, and the relative ease with which it could be carved into elegant shapes made it ideal. Alabaster is also non-porous, crucial for preventing precious oils from seeping out or spoiling. You'd see it fashioned into slender flasks, often called alabastra, a name that might even have given the stone its name, or vice versa. And with a narrow neck to minimize evaporation and a flat, disc-like rim, perfect for dabbing or spreading the oil. Small, lidded pots for holding thicker unguents or kohl were also common. You wouldn't want your essence of eternal bliss leaking out before you even got to the Hall of Judgment. That stuff was probably more valuable per drop than a brand new chariot with spinning rims. Then there's faience, that quintessentially Egyptian material. It's a non-clay ceramic, made from powdered quartz or sand, coated with a vitreous glaze that could be fired to achieve brilliant colors. Most notably, vibrant blues and greens, hues deeply associated with life, rebirth, water, and vegetation. Faience perfume pots could be molded into all sorts of charming shapes, perhaps adorned with incised decorations of lotus flowers, papyrus reeds, or protective hieroglyphs. While perhaps not considered as noble or expensive as the finest alabaster, faience vessels were incredibly popular, bringing a splash of joyful color to the dressing table and the tomb. Other types of stone, like hard, dark diorite, mottled serpentine, or smooth steatite, were also used, requiring even greater skill from the carver due to their hardness, but resulting in incredibly durable and often strikingly beautiful containers. For more everyday oils or larger quantities, sturdy Nile clay pottery would be used, often glazed on the inside to make it less porous, or sealed with a coating of resin or wax. But as Egyptian technology evolved, particularly in the New Kingdom, glass began to make a dazzling appearance. Early Egyptian glass vessels, often created using the core-formed technique where molten glass is wrapped around a removable core, were luxury items, prized for their vibrant colors, often imitating precious stones like lapis lazuli or turquoise. These delicate, colorful little flasks and jars were perfect for holding the most exclusive and costly perfumes. And for the absolute pinnacle of society, the pharaohs and their immediate circle, perfume containers could even be crafted from gold or silver, like some of the breathtaking examples found in Tutankhamun's tomb, sometimes inlaid with semi-precious stones, true masterpieces of the goldsmith's art. The variety in shapes and designs is simply astounding, reflecting both functionality and a keen aesthetic sense. You'd find those tall, slender kohl tubes, often designed as a double cylinder to hold both black galena and green malachite kohl, complete with their slender applicators. Some vessels took on whimsical figurative forms. A perfume pot shaped like a protective Bez dwarf, a fish-shaped flask perhaps symbolizing fertility in the Nile, or a container in the form of a trussed duck, a common food offering. Here perhaps a playful nod to a scented feast. Many were adorned with painted details or incised patterns, and often hieroglyphic inscriptions would name the owner. The specific perfume contained within perfume of Ra, perhaps the quantity, or even a short dedicatory prayer like, "May you anoint yourself with this divine essence in the beautiful West." It was like an ancient form of personalized branding, but with much higher stakes. Great care was also taken in sealing these precious vessels. Lids were often made from the same material as the jar itself, fitting snugly. Simpler stoppers could be fashioned from wood, pottery, or tightly wadded linen. These would then frequently be sealed over with a layer of beeswax or Nile mud, sometimes impressed with a stamp bearing a royal cartouche or a protective symbol, ensuring the contents remained untainted and the fragrance locked within until its destined moment of use. You can imagine the satisfying little crackle as a 3,000-year-old seal is broken, releasing a ghostly puff of ancient aroma. It's a moment that gives archaeologists goosebumps and probably makes them wish for a very, very advanced form of smell-o-vision. A quirky tidbit related to tomb provisions is the existence of so-called dummy jars. Sometimes, particularly in less wealthy burials or as part of a larger set, you might find vessels made of solid stone or roughly shaped pottery, cleverly painted to look like they were full of precious oils or cosmetics. This was perhaps a way to ensure the deceased had the magical idea of an unending supply without the considerable expense of providing the real thing in vast quantities. Historians still debate whether certain very elaborate or unusual vessel shapes had specific, now lost ritualistic functions, or if their intricate forms were designed to somehow enhance the magical potency or symbolic meaning of the perfume they held. Perhaps the very act of crafting a container in the shape of a sacred animal imbued the contents with that animal's protective or regenerative powers. The sheer artistry and dedication poured into creating these containers, from the simplest clay pot to the most ornate golden flask, underscores the immense value placed on their fragrant contents. These weren't just bottles, they were miniature treasure chests, cradling the scented souls of flowers and resins, essences that connected the Egyptians to their gods, their world, and their hopes for eternity. And sometimes, the precious ingredients that filled these beautiful jars had traveled a very long way to reach the banks of the Nile. You've seen the beautiful alabaster jars, the vibrant faience pots, all meticulously crafted to hold Egypt's precious scented oils and unguents. You know the symbolic power of lotus, myrrh, and frankincense. But have you ever stopped to wonder just how far some of these aromatic treasures had to travel? To grace the temples and tombs along the Nile, while Egypt was blessed with its own fragrant flora, like the blue lotus and various herbs from those carefully tended temple gardens. Many of the most highly prized ingredients, the rich resins and exotic spices that form the backbone of sacred incenses like kaifi and the most luxurious perfumes, were not native to its black soil. Their allure was heightened by their rarity, their mystique amplified by the distant, almost legendary lands from which they came. This demand for divine aromas fueled incredible journeys, establishing what you might call the ancient world's Silk Road for smells, the fragrant highways of antiquity. Let's talk about frankincense and myrrh, those absolute staples of the Egyptian sacred scent repertoire. These aromatic resins are harvested from rather scraggly-looking trees of the Boswellia frankincense and Commiphora myrrh species, which thrive in arid, rocky environments. While some varieties might have grown closer by, the most coveted sources lay far to the south and east. One of the most famous sources, celebrated in Egyptian texts and reliefs, was the enigmatic land of Punt. Pinpointing Punt on a modern map is still a favorite pastime for Egyptologists, but the general consensus places it somewhere in the Horn of Africa. Think modern-day Somalia, Eritrea, Djibouti, perhaps parts of coastal Sudan or Ethiopia. Expeditions to Punt were major undertakings, often state-sponsored and involving perilous sea voyages down the Red Sea. The most renowned of these is undoubtedly the one dispatched by Queen Hatshepsut in the 15th century BCE. Her magnificent mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri is adorned with vivid reliefs depicting this grand adventure Egyptian ships laden not just with sacks of resin, ebony, gold, ivory, and exotic animals like baboons and giraffes, but with live myrrh trees, their root balls carefully contained in baskets, ready to be transplanted in Egypt. Imagine the care required. It's not like they had track my papyrus back then to check on their precious cargo of baby incense trees. The shipping and handling charges alone must have been astronomical. These expeditions were a direct attempt to secure these vital aromatic resources. However, Punt wasn't the only source, nor sea the only route. Extensive overland incense routes also snaked across the vast Arabian Peninsula. Southern Arabia, particularly regions in modern-day Yemen and Oman, was famed for producing exceptionally high-quality frankincense and myrrh. Camel caravans, those ships of the desert, would transport these precious resins, along with other exotic goods that might have trickled in from even further east, northwards along treacherous desert paths. These caravans, often led by skilled Bedouin traders who knew the desert's secrets, would eventually reach trading posts in the Levant or directly at Egypt's eastern borders. The control of these routes, and the oases that sustained them, meant immense wealth and influence. Then there were spices like cinnamon and cassia, crucial for kaifi and other warming, complex perfumes. These did not grow anywhere near Egypt or even Arabia. Their true origins lay deep in Southeast Asia, perhaps Sri Lanka, Indonesia, or southern China. The journey of these barks to the Nile was an epic of ancient global trade, a relay race across vast distances. They likely traveled by sea across the Indian Ocean to ports in India or Arabia, then were transshipped overland or via further sea routes up the Red Sea or through the Persian Gulf, eventually finding their way into Egyptian perfume workshops. The ancient historian Herodotus, bless his often wildly imaginative heart, spun some fantastic tales about how cinnamon was collected. He wrote of giant cinnamon birds that built their nests from cinnamon sticks on inaccessible mountain peaks, and brave Arabs who would leave out large pieces of meat for the birds to carry to their nests, causing the nest to break under the weight so the cinnamon could be gathered. Another story involved winged serpents guarding frankincense trees. Such tales, likely perpetuated by cunning traders, served to obscure the true distant sources of these spices and keep their prices sky high. Fighting off a flock of giant mythical cinnamon birds for your favorite incense ingredient really makes you appreciate the relative ease of popping down to the temple gift shop for a refill. The economic impact of this long-distance fragrance trade was enormous. These aromatics were lightweight, high-value commodities, essentially ancient luxury goods. The desire for them fueled exploration, fostered diplomatic ties, sometimes involving the exchange of these precious items as royal gifts, and led to the rise of prosperous trading hubs along the routes. The Ptolemaic and Roman periods later saw this trade intensify even further, with more direct maritime links being established across the Indian Ocean. The exact pathways, particularly for spices like cinnamon originating from so far east during the earlier pharaonic periods, are still a subject of keen scholarly debate. Historians still pore over fragmented texts and archaeological clues to map the precise overland and maritime networks for these trans-Eurasian spice routes. With some theories suggesting surprisingly complex Indian Ocean connections far earlier than once believed, and the level of organization and the distances involved are truly mind-boggling for a time without advanced navigation or swift communication. Yet, Egypt's unyielding desire for these exotic treasures, these scents that connected them to their gods and promised a fragrant eternity, drove this incredible ancient commerce. The perfumers waiting by the Nile had, with their mortars and pestles, relied on these intrepid sailors and caravan leaders to bring them the raw materials for their sacred art. And it was these precious imported ingredients, alongside carefully cultivated local botanicals, that formed the palette for some of Egypt's most enduring aromatic legacies. Legacies that some even today attempt to rediscover and recreate. You've journeyed along the fragrant spice routes, witnessing the immense effort and global connections required to bring exotic resins and rare barks to the perfumers on the Nile. You've seen how these precious ingredients, along with locally cultivated botanicals, were transformed into sacred incenses and luxurious unguents. But what if you could actually smell them today? Not just imagine their symbolic meanings, but experience a genuine whiff of kaifi, or the perfume that might have graced Cleopatra's wrists, or the sacred oil used to anoint Tutankhamun. This tantalizing possibility, the chance to resurrect these lost aromas, is the focus of a fascinating modern quest undertaken by scientists, historians, and perfumers alike. It's like an archaeological dig for the nose, an attempt to unlock the olfactory secrets of a bygone era. The allure is undeniable. To recreate an ancient Egyptian perfume would be to forge a direct sensory link to the past, to breathe the same air, in a sense, as a pharaoh or a priestess. It's driven by more than just curiosity. It's about understanding their technology, their sophisticated knowledge of botanicals, their artistry, and the very essence of their culture in a way that texts and artifacts alone cannot convey. Imagine the thrill of successfully blending a mixture that ancient papyri describe as divine. It's like trying to bake a cake using a recipe where half the ingredients are listed as a gift from the gods of the West. And the oven temperature is when raw is moderately pleased but not too fiery. But this quest is fraught with challenges. A veritable obstacle course for even the most dedicated researchers. Firstly, the recipes themselves are often frustratingly vague. Those hieroglyphic inscriptions on temple walls, like at Edfu, or the descriptions by classical authors like Plutarch, might list ingredients for something like kaifi, but they rarely give precise quantities, exact preparation methods for each component, or the specific order of blending. It's often more of a shopping list than a step-by-step instruction manual. A measure of frankincense, a portion of myrrh, sweetened with raisins soaked in wine. How big a measure? What kind of wine? For how long? The devil, as they say, is in the details, and the ancient Egyptians were very good at keeping their sacred trade secrets. Then there's the identification of the actual ingredients. Translating ancient Egyptian plant names or the Greek and Latin terms used by classical authors into modern botanical species is a minefield. The word calamus might refer to sweet flag, but which specific variety, juniper, could mean one of several species with different scent profiles. Some ingredient names remain utterly obscure, their true identity lost to time. And even if you can identify a plant, the ancient variety might have possessed a different chemical composition, and therefore a different scent profile than its modern descendants. Due to thousands of years of different growing conditions, cultivation practices, or natural evolution. The archaeological samples themselves pose another hurdle. While scientists can analyze residues found in ancient perfume jars and unguent pots, these substances are often heavily degraded after millennia in a tomb. The volatile aromatic compounds that make up a scent are, by their nature, prone to evaporation and chemical change. Contamination from the burial environment or even from early excavation methods can further complicate analysis. Trying to reconstruct a complex perfume from a 3,000-year-old smear of degraded resin and fat, mixed with a bit of ancient dust and hope, is the ultimate forensic olfactory challenge. Despite these obstacles, the quest continues, armed with an impressive arsenal of modern techniques. Egyptologists and classical scholars meticulously decipher ancient texts, looking for clues in hieroglyphs and papyri. Archaeobotanists and paleobotanists identify plant remains found in tombs or ancient settlements, providing physical evidence of what was available. And then there's the high-tech magic of analytical chemistry. Techniques like gas chromatography mass, spectrometry GCMS, allow scientists to separate and identify the chemical components present in those ancient residues. By matching these chemical fingerprints to known substances, they can suggest possible ingredients. This method was famously used on residues from Tutankhamun's tomb and on contents of jars from other sites, sometimes revealing traces of fats, resins like frankincense or pistacia, and various plant oils, giving tantalizing glimpses into actual ancient recipes. Experimental archaeology also plays a vital role. Researchers attempt to replicate ancient extraction methods like maceration or enfleurage, using historically plausible materials and techniques. They might crush flowers with stone tools, steep them in moringa oil, heated gently over a charcoal fire, or try to clarify animal fats just as an ancient Egyptian perfumer might have done. It's a hands-on approach that provides invaluable insights into the practicalities and potential results of these ancient processes. Often, these projects are highly collaborative, bringing together experts from vastly different fields: an Egyptologist to interpret the texts, a botanist to identify the plants, a chemist to analyze the residues, and a skilled modern perfumer to try and translate all this data into a tangible scent. There have been some notable attempts to recreate specific ancient perfumes, such as the legendary Mendesian perfume, named after the ancient city of Mendes in the Nile Delta, which was renowned for its fragrant concoctions in antiquity. These projects, based on meticulous research into texts and archaeological finds, sometimes yield fragrances that are remarkably complex and pleasing, offering a fleeting olfactory echo of the past. One quirky aspect is the sheer excitement when a recreated scent even vaguely aligns with historical descriptions or the researcher's expectations. Imagine the moment after years of work when a blend is finally sniffed and someone exclaims, "Yes, that has the divine warmth" Plutarch was talking about, or the surprise when an unexpected ingredient, like celery seed oil, is identified in an ancient cosmetic through chemical analysis, forcing a rethink of known recipes. Of course, historians and scientists still debate how closely any modern recreation can truly mirror an ancient original. Given all the variables, the precise nature of the ancient ingredients, the subtleties of lost techniques, the possible inclusion of ritual elements we can't replicate, and even the subjective nature of scent perception itself, can we ever be certain we are smelling exactly what an ancient Egyptian smelled? Maybe their heavenly aroma of sacred lotus would just smell like pleasant pond water to our 21st century noses. Desensitized by an onslaught of synthetic fragrances, or perhaps more romantically, their ancient masterpieces would outshine anything we produce today. Regardless of whether a perfect olfactory replica is achievable, the quest itself is incredibly valuable. Each attempt, each analysis, each experiment teaches us more about ancient Egyptian science, their deep understanding of the natural world, their global trade connections, their artistic sensibilities, and the rich sensory landscape they inhabited. These lost formulas, even partially rediscovered, offer a fragrant whisper from a civilization that believed in the eternal power of scent. We've journeyed far together, haven't we? From the fertile banks of the Nile, where the first whispers of lotus and papyrus scented the air, through the bustling temple workshops alive with the alchemical transformation of flowers and resins, we've peeked into the perfumer's closely guarded secrets, witnessed the elaborate daily rituals of scented beauty, and stood in solemn observation as sacred aromas prepared the deceased for their voyage into eternity. We've even considered the modern quest to recapture these elusive ancient fragrances. Now, as our own sleepy exploration draws towards its close, it's time to reflect on the enduring legacy of these scents, the eternal echoes they've left in the sands of time and in our collective imagination. The ancient Egyptians didn't just want to live forever, they wanted to smell absolutely amazing while doing it. Now that's what you call commitment to the brand. The power of scent in Egyptian belief was not a mere footnote to their theology or a frivolous aspect of their culture. It was a cornerstone. For thousands of years, through the rise and fall of dynasties, from the Old Kingdom to the Ptolemaic and Roman eras, the conviction that pleasant aromas were intrinsically linked to life, purity, divinity, and rebirth remained remarkably constant. This wasn't just a passing trend, it was a deeply embedded worldview. To be fragrant was to be alive, to be blessed, to be acceptable to the gods. Conversely, foul odors signified decay, danger, and spiritual impurity. This fundamental belief shaped their rituals, their daily habits, and their meticulous preparations for the afterlife. They weren't just aiming for a five-star review for their eternal existence. They were striving for a divine, good scent-keeping seal of approval for their very souls. Scent was a potent agent of transformation. For the living, a carefully chosen perfume could enhance beauty, signal status, evoke desire, and perhaps even instill a sense of confidence or spiritual well-being. It was a way to present oneself to the world and to the gods in the best possible light, or rather, the best possible aroma. For the dead, the transformation was even more profound. The sacred resins and oils of the embalming process didn't just preserve the physical form, they were believed to imbue the the mummy, with divine qualities, rendering it pure, incorruptible, and godlike. This fragrant shell would then house the Ka and Ba, allowing the deceased to navigate the underworld and emerge into the field of reeds as an effective and blessed spirit. Imagine, for a moment, the Egyptian vision of that afterlife, the field of reeds. It wasn't conceived as a sterile, abstract heaven, but as an idealized version of Egypt itself, a fertile paradise where the deceased would enjoy eternal abundance. And you can be sure that in their imaginings, this paradise was beautifully scented. Perhaps the celestial Nile there was perpetually fringed with ever-blooming blue lotus flowers, their fragrance mingling with the ever-present, gentle smoke of myrrh and frankincense offered by the blessed dead to the benevolent gods. Arriving there, reeking of the journey or, gods forbid, decay, was simply not an option. You had to bring your own pleasant aura, carefully cultivated in life and meticulously preserved in death. This profound reverence for aromatics and the sophisticated perfumery skills the Egyptians developed didn't go unnoticed by their neighbors. As Egyptian influence spread, so too did their love for and knowledge of perfumes. The Greeks, and later the Romans, were captivated by Egyptian scents, importing vast quantities of their finished perfumes and raw ingredients. They adopted and adapted many Egyptian techniques and aromatic preferences, further spreading the appreciation for complex fragrances throughout the ancient Mediterranean world. The legacy of Egyptian perfumery thus rippled outwards, influencing cultures for centuries to come. And why do these ancient scents still hold such fascination for us today, thousands of years later, as we sit here in our modern world, perhaps in Vietnam or anywhere else across the globe, surrounded by our own contemporary aromas? Perhaps it's the inherent mystery, the allure of something precious and lost that we long to rediscover. Perhaps it's the recognition of a shared human experience, our own deep-seated connection to fragrance, the way a particular scent can instantly evoke a memory, a feeling, or a sense of place, the desire for beauty, for transcendence, for a connection to something larger than ourselves. These are universal human aspirations, and the Egyptians expressed them, in part, through their profound relationship with the world of scent. A quirky thought some archaeologists have speculated that certain tomb designs, with their carefully constructed shafts, might have been intended not just for ventilation during construction, but perhaps to allow the scent of offerings or incense burned within the chapel to waft outwards, a subtle, fragrant reminder to the living of the deceased's continued, blessed existence. It's a poetic idea, the tomb gently breathing its sacred aromas into the world of the living, a true eternal echo. Historians still debate the extent to which the complex theological and symbolic meanings behind perfume use were deeply understood by every single farmer or artisan, versus the more nuanced understanding held by the priestly and scribal elite. Was it always a profound spiritual conviction for everyone involved? Or for many, was it more about upholding tradition, expressing hope, and doing what felt right to ensure a peaceful and pleasant eternity? Perhaps, as with many aspects of faith and ritual, it was a tapestry woven from all these threads. The story of ancient Egyptian perfumes is more than just a history of pleasant smells. It's a story about belief, about art, about science, about global trade, and about the eternal human desire to engage with the world through all our senses. Even though the precise aromas of Nefertiti's favorite unguent or the exact blend of kaifi that calmed the priests in Karnak may be lost to the winds of time, their dedication, their artistry, and the profound significance they attributed to these ephemeral essences continue to resonate. The eternal echoes of these ancient scents linger, not just in the degraded residues in museum jars, but in our own enduring fascination with the power of perfume to transform, to soothe, and to connect us to something ancient and deeply human. Our journey through their scented world is drawing to a sleepy close, but the fragrance of their legacy remains,